Drip, drip, nothing. The water cut off midstream, leaving my toothbrush foaming and my patience instantly evaporating. I twisted the faucet handle back and forth, like maybe, just maybe, the problem was my imagination. But there was only silence. A silence so loud it seemed to mock me, filling every corner of the kitchen with its emptiness. My stomach dropped. Something was wrong. Very wrong. I stood frozen, the taste of mint turning bitter in my mouth. This wasn't a city outage. No, the city didn't work like that. Not in this neighborhood, not without a notice slipped into mailboxes days in advance. And I hadn't received a single letter. My gut told me this was something else. Something personal. Something intentional. You ever have that moment where your instincts scream the truth before your brain catches up? That's exactly what this was. And in our neighborhood, there was only one person who could have orchestrated something like this: Karen. Now, let me set the scene. Willow Creek Estates wasn't the kind of place where neighbors waved from porches with lemonade in hand. It was manicured perfection on the surface, with identical mailboxes standing like soldiers and lawns trimmed to regulation height. But beneath that, it was a battlefield. And Karen, the HOA president, was our general, judge, and executioner rolled into one. He wore power like a second skin, hiding behind bylaws as though they were commandments etched in stone. And if you dared to cross her, well, you might wake up one morning to find your lawn flagged for weeds you couldn't even see. Or in my case, your water supply mysteriously cut. 3 weeks earlier, the first shots in our little suburban war had been fired. It started with a letter, a violation notice, printed on official HOA header lead slipped into my mailbox like a dagger. The offense? My well pump shed had a coat of paint she deemed non-compliant beige. Non-compliant beige. Imagine that. I almost laughed, except the letter came with a warning: repaint within 10 days or face escalating fines. That's Karen for you, policing the exact shade of beige in a neighborhood where nobody even asked for her leadership. I thought I could ignore her. I'd seen plenty of homeowners cave under her nitpicky enforcement, but I wasn't about to bow down. My well pump had been running smoothly for years, tucked away on the back corner of my lot, painted in a color so neutral, I swear even God wouldn't notice it. But to Karen, it was a symbol that I wasn't afraid to push back. And in her world, that was an unforgivable sin. The next HOA meeting made it clear I'd been marked. Picture a community room lit by buzzing fluorescent lights, folding chairs in neat rows, and neighbors shifting uncomfortably as Karen held court. She stood at the podium, pearls catching the light, binder full of rules clutched like scripture. Some residents, she announced, glaring directly at me, believe they are exempt from community standards. They are not. Her voice carried the weight of accusation, and though she never said my name, every eye in that room turned my way. That's when I knew. She wasn't just enforcing rules, she was waging a campaign. Back in the present, staring at the dead faucet, her campaign had just gone nuclear. You might wonder, could she really cut my water? Technically, no. HOAs don't have authority over private wells, but here's the trick. They can control access. They can inspect structures, issue orders for safety compliance, and in some cases, coordinate with contractors under the guise of community maintenance. And Karen, with her uncanny ability to bend rules until they screamed, had found a way to weaponize those gray areas. My well was no longer just a utility, it was a target. I stormed outside, toothbrush still in hand, and made for the shed. The morning air was sharp, the grass wet with dew, but my eyes locked on the back corner of my yard. The door hung crooked, padlock broken clean off. My heart pounded as I yanked it open. Inside, the well cap was sealed over, not with a simple cover, with cement, a thick gray slab poured and hardened overnight. my water supply, my independence from city utilities entombed under 6 inches of HOA-sanctioned spite. Do you know the smell of fresh cement? It's acrid, damp, impossible to miss. That smell clung to the air, proof that this wasn't just sabotage. This was deliberate, recent, and sanctioned by someone with authority to hire a crew without anyone asking questions. My blood boiled, and right on cue, as if the devil herself had staged it, Karen's voice floated over the fence. "Morning," she chirped, feigning innocence. She was watering her roses. The irony almost made me laugh. Water gushed freely from her hose, glistening in the sun, while mine had been stolen overnight. "Having, plumbing issues?" she asked, her smirk sharper than a knife. I clenched my fists, biting back every word I wanted to throw at her, because here's the thing. Yelling wouldn't fix this, not in her game. In her game, every move had to be calculated. Later that day, I filed a report with the city water department. I expected disbelief, maybe even laughter, but the inspector's face hardened when I showed him photos of the cement. "They can't do this," he muttered, shaking his head. "Private wells are outside HOA jurisdiction unless there's a documented safety violation. Did they give you notice?" I shoved the violation letter across his desk. He scanned it, then looked up at me. "This isn't valid, not even close." And just like that, I had my first weapon, proof of overreach. But in neighborhoods like ours, justice doesn't move fast. Appeals take weeks, investigations even longer. And in the meantime, I was hauling bottled water from the store like a pioneer. Karen, meanwhile, flaunted her victory at every chance. I overheard her at the grocery store, bragging to another board member. "Some people think they're above the rules. Not anymore." Their laughter echoed through the aisles, sharp and cruel. The escalation came sooner than I expected. A week later, another notice landed in my mailbox. This time, the offense was unauthorized modification of water systems. Let that sink in. She cemented my well, then accused me of violating the rules for trying to fix it. And with that notice came the threat of daily fines. Not just 20 or 50 bucks, hundreds. Karen was trying to bankrupt me into submission. At the next board meeting, I confronted her. The room was packed, tension so thick you could taste it. "You cut my water," I said, voice steady though my pulse raced. "You overstepped your authority." Karen didn't flinch. She leaned into the microphone, pearls glinting under the lights. "Sir, this board enforces community safety. Your unauthorized well was a hazard. We acted in the best interests of Willow Creek Estates." The smugness in her tone made the neighbors shift uncomfortably. Some looked sympathetic, others afraid. But Karen, she was unshakable. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the sound of silence from my faucet echoing in my mind. She thought she'd won. She thought she had me cornered with her bylaws and fines. But she had made one fatal mistake. She forgot that water, whether from a well or the city, doesn't just flow one way. It's controlled. It's monitored. And with the right call to the right department, the flow could stop. Not just for me, for everyone. Karen's entire empire ran on water she didn't own, and soon she was going to learn what it felt like to live without it.
The sound was faint, almost too faint to trust, a scraping, rhythmic and metallic, carried through the midnight air. At first, I thought it was some stray animal clawing through the hedges, but then came the low thud of shovels, followed by muffled laughter. I froze by the window, every nerve in my body tightening. Out past the glow of the streetlights, shadows moved at the edge of my property line. And in those shadows, I saw her, Karen. You ever feel a chill crawl down your spine even when the night air is warm? That was me, standing barefoot on the hardwood floor, watching my HOA president direct 2 board members like they were her personal demolition crew. Their voices were hushed, their movements precise. This wasn't mischief. This was a mission. I couldn't see the details from the window, but I knew exactly where they were working. The shed that housed my well. I pressed closer to the glass, heart hammering. A flashlight beam flickered across the shed door. Metal clanged. Cement dust puffed into the air, visible even in the dim light. My stomach sank as the pieces clicked together. They weren't just inspecting. They weren't just tampering. They were burying my water supply alive. The instinct to storm outside nearly overwhelmed me, to shout, to fight, to catch them red-handed. But I forced myself still. Why? Because in a war like this, evidence matters more than anger. And the moment you lose control in front of Karen, she wins. I grabbed my phone, recorded through the blinds, catching every scrape, every laugh, every whispered order. Make it smooth, no cracks. Those words would burn themselves into my memory. By dawn, the damage was done. My shed door hung ajar, the padlock pried open. Inside, where the clean metal cap of my well should have been, a mound of wet cement glistened in the gray light of morning. Still damp, still curing, still choking the life out of my independence. The smell was unmistakable, sharp, acrid, chemical, a smell that clung to the back of my throat like a warning. You might be wondering, could an HOA legally authorize something like this? The short answer is no. But here's the loophole Karen used. In our bylaws, there was a clause about unauthorized structures and safety hazards. If a system was deemed non-compliant and ignored after notice, the HOA had the power to remediate. Usually that meant trimming overgrown bushes or repainting a fence at the owner's expense. But Karen twisted that language like taffy. To her, remediate meant entombing a fully functional well under a block of concrete. I knew I couldn't let this slide. That morning I knocked on my neighbor Bill's door. Bill had lived in Willow Creek Estates since the development broke ground, long before Karen ever donned her power pearls. He stepped onto the porch, coffee in hand, eyebrows raised as I showed him the cement. Good God, that's criminal, not just HOA business. He glanced around nervously, lowering his voice. She's been after you since you pushed back at that meeting. You know she's making an example out of you, right? And he was right. This wasn't about beige paint or bylaws. This was about control. Karen needed everyone in the subdivision to fear her authority. She needed me to be the cautionary tale. Later that afternoon, I confronted her. She was in her front yard, pruning roses, dressed like she was attending Sunday service rather than gardening. I walked up, phone in hand, ready to play the recording. "You destroyed my well," I said flatly. She didn't even blink. Instead, she tilted her head, that condescending smile spreading across her face. "Destroyed?" she said sweetly. "No, we remediated. Your shed was out of compliance, and your well presented a hazard. The board voted unanimously." I narrowed my eyes. "Funny, I only saw 3 of you last night." For a split second, her composure cracked. A flash of recognition flickered across her eyes. But then she leaned closer, lowering her voice so only I could hear. "Careful, you're already on thin ice. Keep pushing, and those fines will multiply faster than you can keep up." That was her weapon of choice, fines. In the HOA world, fines are the noose. They start small, $20 here, $50 there, but miss a payment, they snowball. They accrue interest, and before you know it, the HOA places a lien on your home. I'd seen it happen to others. A neighbor 2 streets over once had his house nearly foreclosed over unpaid landscape violations. Karen knew the system inside and out, and she wielded it like a guillotine. But here's where her arrogance betrayed her. She thought I was isolated. She thought nobody would back me up. But that night, as whispers spread across Willow Creek, neighbors began to take notice. At the mailbox cluster, I overheard hushed conversations. "Did you hear what she did to his well? She can't get away with that, can she? Who's next?" The seed of doubt had been planted. Karen's rule wasn't invincible. And deep down, I knew I had to water that seed, even if my own water was locked under cement. The escalation came 2 days later. An envelope appeared in my mailbox, sealed with the HOA's crest like it was some royal decree. Inside, a formal notice of violation. The charge? Tampering with HOA-authorized property remediation. I laughed out loud bitterly. Think about it. She destroyed my well, then accused me of tampering with the very sabotage she ordered. And attached to the notice was the threat of daily fines, $200 per day, until the remediation was accepted. That evening, I attended the board meeting. The community hall smelled of burnt coffee and disinfectant wipes. Karen sat at the head table, gavel in hand, pearls gleaming under the fluorescent light. I waited my turn, then stood. "You trespassed on my property," I said, voice steady but firm. "You damaged my well without proper authority, and I have video proof." Gasps rippled through the room. I held up my phone, replaying the footage for all to hear. Karen's voice filled the hall. "Make it smooth, no cracks." A murmur rose from the crowd, neighbors shifting uneasily in their folding chairs. For a moment, I thought I had her cornered. But Karen didn't flinch. She leaned forward, tapping the microphone. "This recording proves nothing. Our bylaws grant authority for emergency remediation, and we deemed your well unsafe. You're lucky we acted quickly." Her tone was icy, calculated, designed to shut down debate. And just like that, she slammed the gavel. Motion carried. Daily fines stand. I left the hall with every eye on me, some sympathetic, some fearful. Karen had turned my life into a public spectacle. And yet as much as it stung, as much as I wanted to scream, I walked out with something she didn't realize. Leverage. The city inspector's words, the neighbor's whispers, the video. Individually they were weak, but together they were cracks in her cement wall. That night, lying in bed, I replayed her smirk in my mind. She thought she had buried me under that cement, but what she didn't see was that she'd also buried herself in arrogance, in overreach, in evidence I was quietly stacking like dominoes. And soon, all it would take was the right push to bring it all crashing down. "Read the bylaws," she screamed, slamming the binder onto the folding table so hard the styrofoam coffee cups trembled. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, and for one split second the whole community room went quiet. Karen stood there, pearls rattling against her collarbone as if she had just called down divine judgment. And in that silence, I realized the truth. This wasn't about community order. This was about domination. You want to know what it feels like to be bludgeoned with paper? Not just any paper, but bylaws written so densely they might as well be scripture carved into stone? That was Karen's specialty. She didn't raise her voice often. She didn't need to. She had the rule book. And in her hands, those pages weren't rules. They were weapons, sharp enough to cut, heavy enough to crush. Neighbors shifted in their seats, eyes darting between me and her. Everyone had seen this play before. One resident steps out of line, Karen slaps him down with a citation, and the rest take the hint. The HOA wasn't about keeping property values up anymore. It was about keeping Karen's ego inflated. But let me take you back a few weeks earlier, before that meeting, before the binder slam. The stage was already set. My mailbox, freshly painted black, had become her latest fixation. According to Section 7.3.1 of the Willow Creek Covenants, mailboxes were to remain in uniform, neutral tones. Neutral, of course, was never defined, but Karen defined it for everyone else. To her, neutral meant beige. Always beige. So when I chose black, a sleek, factory-issued black, the same as dozens of other neighborhoods across town,
It wasn't a violation of municipal code. It wasn't unsafe. It wasn't even unusual. But to Karen, it was an act of war. 2 days later, the notice appeared. Mailbox, non-compliant. Remedy within 10 days or be fined $100 per day. The notice was printed in all caps, bolded, and taped to my front door like a scarlet letter. I tore it down, marched across the street, and found her pruning those roses again. She always seemed to be pruning when she knew someone was coming to confront her, like the thorns gave her plausible deniability for the cuts she left behind. "It's black," I said, holding the notice up. "Plenty of people have black mailboxes. Show me where in the bylaws it says otherwise." Karen smiled without looking up. Section 7.3.1, neutral tones only. Black is neutral. Her shears snapped shut. Not in Willow Creek. That was her move. Keep it vague, keep it subjective, and weaponize interpretation. You'd be surprised how often HOA bylaws are written in gray zones, vague enough to allow flexibility, but flexible enough to allow abuse, and Karen exploited every inch of wiggle room. By the time the fines started rolling in, I wasn't even surprised. First the mailbox, then the hedges, which she claimed were encroaching by precisely 3 inches. Then the trash bin, left visible for exactly 22 minutes past collection time. Each violation came with escalating fines. $25 here, $75 there. Always framed as per day, so the numbers ballooned faster than most neighbors could fight back. The trick of it was fear. Most people paid quietly. A fine here, a warning there, better to fold than face the wrath of Karen. And in a way, I didn't blame them. Nobody wants a lien slapped on their house. Because yes, in most states, HOAs can escalate unpaid fines into liens and liens into foreclosures. Imagine losing your home over a mailbox color. It sounds absurd, doesn't it? But that's exactly the noose Karen dangled. And yet, here's what Karen never expected. I read the bylaws too, not just skimmed them. I studied them. Nights spent under the weak lamp glow, pages spread across my kitchen table, highlighter in hand, every clause underlined, every reference cross-checked against municipal code. If Karen wanted to play this game, I was going to learn every angle of the board. That's when I found it, buried deep in Section 11.2.4, a clause so innocuous it almost read like filler. No amendment, interpretation, or enforcement of these bylaws shall conflict with state or municipal law. Do you see it yet? Karen had stretched neutral tone into her personal beige dictatorship, but municipal code, it recognized black as a standard, compliant color for residential mailboxes. That meant her ruling wasn't just arbitrary, it was unlawful. The realization hit me like a shot of adrenaline. For the first time, I had leverage. Not a vague video, not a whispered rumor, but a clear-cut legal mismatch. A weapon as sharp as the one she had swung at me. I tested the waters at the next meeting. The folding chairs squeaked under the weight of half the neighborhood. Karen presided at the front, her binder stacked high with fresh violation slips, ready to be handed out like parking tickets. I waited until the open forum portion, then stood, my voice steady. Per Section 11.2.4 of our bylaws, no enforcement can conflict with municipal code. The city recognizes black as a standard compliant color for residential mailboxes. That means your ruling is invalid. A murmur swept the room. I saw Bill smirk from the back row. For once, the gavel didn't slam immediately. For once, Karen hesitated. Then she laughed, sharp, cutting, dismissive. You think you've outsmarted me with a technicality? The board decides what constitutes compliance, not you. And that was when I made my move. Then let the board vote, right here, right now, on record. Is black a violation? The air grew thick. Board members glanced at one another, uncomfortable. One of them, Tom, whom I'd seen moving Karen's cement bags just weeks earlier, cleared his throat. I mean, technically, black is used everywhere else. I don't see the— Karen cut him off with a glare that could kill. The vote stands as a violation, she snapped, gripping the gavel. Motion carried. Daily fines continue. The room erupted, not in applause, not in chaos, but in whispers. Neighbors shifting in their seats, eyes darting between me and her, the unease spreading like wildfire. Because now it wasn't just my fight. Now they had seen the abuse in real time. They had heard the contradiction, and Karen, in her arrogance, had handed me the spark I needed. After the meeting, as people shuffled out, I caught snippets of conversation. She can't keep doing this. He's right, it's in the bylaws. If she's wrong about the mailbox, what else has she twisted? The seed of rebellion had been planted, and Karen's iron grip had begun to rust. But that night didn't end there. Back at my house, another envelope waited in the mailbox. This one hand-delivered, no postage, just the HOA letterhead. Inside was a notice of escalation. Effective immediately, my fines would double for public disruption of HOA proceedings. $200 per day, retroactive to the date of the mailbox citation. That's how Karen operated. Cut off one head and she sprouted another, always doubling down, always tightening the screws. She wanted me buried under so much paper, so many threats, that I'd fold like the others. But instead, each notice only hardened my resolve. I spread the letters across my dining table that night, the paper forming a mosaic of intimidation. And in the center, the bylaw book itself. Heavy, ominous, its spine cracked from overuse. That book was supposed to represent community order, but in Karen's hands, it was written in blood ink, every clause twisted, every section sharpened into a blade. I leaned back, staring at the mess, and whispered to myself, if she wants to play by the rules, then I'll make the rules bleed. Because I had realized something crucial. Karen relied on fear, not fairness. She relied on silence, not scrutiny. And if I pushed just hard enough, if I forced the bylaws into the light of municipal law, I could expose her. Not just to the neighbors, not just to the board, but to the city, to the courts, to anyone outside Willow Creek who would see her tyranny for what it was. Still, as I turned out the light that night, I couldn't shake one thought. What would Karen do when she realized the rule book she clung to was about to turn into the knife at her own throat?
The water's been shut off, I told her flatly, watching her pearls go slack against her chest. For once, Karen had no words. Just the slow blink of someone realizing their kingdom had sprung a leak. You've never heard silence like that. Sprinklers across Willow Creek coughed once, hissed, and then died. The manicured lawns she lorded over, the fountains she paraded in newsletters, the irrigation lines she bragged about like arteries of her empire, all of it went bone dry. Kids abandoned half-filled water balloons in cul-de-sacs. Neighbors opened their faucets and found nothing but a hollow gasp of air. And in the middle of it stood Karen, clutching her binder like a flotation device on a sinking ship. It didn't start with a shutoff, of course. It started 3 weeks earlier, the day I found cement packed into my private well. A gray tombstone poured straight into the pipe, solid and final. My backup supply, the one I had counted on since moving in, was destroyed. No note, no witness, just a hardening block of spite. And when I raised it at the next board meeting, Karen tilted her head, feigning innocence. "A shame about that old well," she said, "but surely you don't need it. We all pay into the association's water maintenance anyway." That was when I understood.
She hadn't just cut off my well, she'd tied me to her system, her rules, her control. So I started digging, not with shovels, but with records, public utility files, municipal contracts, water district agreements. If Karen thought she had cemented me into her network forever, she hadn't counted on me finding the cracks in hers. Here's what most neighbors don't realize. HOAs don't own the water. They buy it, like everyone else, often through master meter agreements with the city or county utility. In Willow Creek's case, the HOA purchased bulk water service for irrigation and fountains, then billed homeowners individually for their share, which meant the water didn't flow because Karen allowed it. It flowed because the city did. And cities, unlike Karen, had rules. That discovery led me to a dingy office at City Utilities, tucked between a fire station and a shuttered strip mall, the kind of place you'd never notice unless you needed to. Behind a scuffed counter sat Mr. Alvarez, a man whose entire presence radiated municipal exhaustion. Stacks of permits leaned against his desk, his tie askew, his coffee cold. But his name was on every meter certification in Willow Creek. He was the choke point. "Bulk irrigation supply," I said, sliding the HOA's account number across the counter. "I need the maintenance logs." He glanced at the paper, sighed, then clicked through his computer. "Those records are public," he muttered, "but you're not going to like what you see." And I didn't, not at first. The log showed irregularities, pressure spikes, unexplained surges, and meter tampering notations marked with little red flags. Somebody had been diverting water, rerouting pressure, running the system harder than it was designed to go. That somebody, of course, was the HOA board. And who signed off on every variance request? Karen. Think about it. Fountains gushing at every HOA barbecue, sprinkler heads misting over the tennis courts, ornamental landscaping guzzling gallons while residents were told to conserve. She had turned the water system into her vanity project, overpumping it until the city had slapped under-review warnings across the account, warnings she never shared with homeowners. That was the lever I needed. Municipal code was clear. Abuse the system, the city shuts it down until compliance is verified. No exceptions, no appeals. And Alvarez? He had grown tired of Karen's constant, urgent calls and handwritten demands for preferential treatment. When I showed him copies of her newsletters boasting about round-the-clock fountains while drought restrictions loomed, his eyebrows lifted. "She put this in writing?" I said. "She mailed it to all of us." He leaned back, almost smiling. "Then she dug her own hole." I didn't have to twist the knife. Alvarez filed his inspection report, and within days, city trucks rolled into Willow Creek. Workers in reflective vests popped open meter boxes, clipped padlocks, and spun valves shut. No ceremony, no warnings, just the hiss of pressure bleeding out of a system that had been Karen's pride and joy. The fallout was immediate. That afternoon, Karen stormed into my yard, binder clutched like a shield. "What did you do?" she hissed, voice sharp enough to cut glass. I stayed calm. "Ask the city. Public record." Her face flushed red, the pearls trembling against her throat. "You have endangered the entire community." I tilted my head. "Or maybe you did when you pushed the system past capacity and ignored compliance notices. You knew they were watching. You just thought you were untouchable." Neighbors gathered at their driveways, watching the confrontation like it was primetime television. Whispers traveled fast. No sprinklers, no fountains. Karen's losing it. For once, the fear wasn't radiating from me. It was radiating toward her. But Karen wasn't finished. She never was. That evening, an emergency HOA bulletin landed in our mailboxes. Bold red letters declared service interruption due to vandalism. She blamed an unidentified resident for tampering with the system, warning that costs for repairs would be assessed against the community. And though she didn't name me, everyone knew where her finger was pointing. It might have worked before. It might have scared the neighbors into turning against me. But this time, the facts weren't on her side. Because while she was scribbling accusations, I was filing an open records request for the city's inspection report. The document spelled it out in bureaucratic clarity. Service suspended due to non-compliance by HOA board. Evidence of overuse and misuse in violation of municipal ordinance. I didn't even have to circulate it myself. Tom, the same board member who had once hauled Karen's cement bags, printed copies and handed them out door to door. "He lied to us," he muttered at my driveway. "He's been lying for years." By the next board meeting, the air was charged. Folding chairs filled, fans whirred in the stifling heat, and bottled water ran low. Everyone was sweating, except Karen, who still sat at the head table, binder stacked high and pearls gleaming defiantly. She pounded the gavel. "This disruption is unacceptable. We will restore service as soon as possible, but homeowners must approve a special assessment to cover emergency costs." A murmur of disbelief rolled through the crowd. Bill from Lot 14 stood. "You mean we pay for your fountains while our lawns die?" Karen snapped. "Decorative features raise property values. It's an investment." I rose slowly, feeling the weight of the room tilt toward me. "According to the city's own report," I said, holding up the paper, "service was suspended because the board, meaning you, ignored compliance warnings. This isn't vandalism, it's negligence. And now you want us to fund your mistake." The room erupted. Shouts, jeers, neighbors pounding fists on folding tables. For once, Karen's gavel couldn't drown them out. Her authority slipped, right there in the fluorescent-lit community center, dripping away like water down a storm drain. But still, she didn't back down. "If you think this changes anything," she spat at me across the room, "you are gravely mistaken. I built this community. I will not let you tear it apart." Her voice cracked on the last word, and I knew something had shifted. The binder wasn't enough anymore. The rules weren't enough. Karen was cornered, and cornered people don't retreat quietly. That night, as the heat clung heavy and the sprinklers stayed silent, I lay awake listening. Every creak of the neighborhood, every distant car, every rustle of wind through the dry grass felt loaded, as though the entire subdivision held its breath. Karen wasn't done, not by a long shot. The question was no longer whether she'd strike back. It was how.
Karen's pool is empty. The words weren't spoken like casual gossip. They were delivered like a verdict. You could feel it ripple through the cul-de-sac, a shiver carried from lawn to lawn. For years she had wielded that pool like a scepter, sparkling blue and chemical perfect, a monument to her dominion. And now, a crater of cracked plaster and echoing silence. The water was gone. The illusion was broken. It spread fast, whispers on sidewalks, murmurs over fences, conspiratorial chuckles during morning dog walks. Did you hear? She drained it? No, the city cut her. Each retelling grew sharper, funnier, deadlier. By dusk, the truth hardly mattered. The narrative had already taken root, and it was simple. Karen was losing her grip. You see, in HOA kingdoms, perception is power. Karen knew bylaws better than most lawyers, but no fine or covenant could insulate her from shame. Public opinion was the one court she couldn't preside over, and it was convening now, uninvited, in driveways and cul-de-sacs across Willow Creek.
3 weeks earlier, after the city shut down our irrigation supply, Karen had tried to seize control of the story. Emergency bulletins, finger-pointing, accusations of vandalism. But the inspection report, the one that spelled out her violations in cold bureaucratic ink, had shattered her credibility. The neighbors had seen it with their own eyes, photocopied and passed hand to hand like contraband. For the first time, her binder of rules didn't protect her. It exposed her. And then came the pool. Technically, the city hadn't touched it. They only restricted non-essential use of the master meter supply. But Karen, always desperate to flaunt, had tied her personal pool into the HOA's irrigation lines years ago, quietly, illegally. It worked when water flowed freely. It worked when neighbors were too intimidated to question her. It didn't work once the city sealed the valves. The pipes ran dry, and so did her crown jewel. I'll admit it, I took a certain satisfaction watching her empire dry up 1 square foot at a time. The roses withered at the entrance sign, the ornamental fountain stood still, and behind the wrought iron gate of her backyard, that pool, once her stage for HOA galas, fundraisers, community celebrations, now lay barren, a pale blue scar under the sun. The shift wasn't immediate, but it was visible. Board members who once marched at her side began stepping back. Tom, who'd carried her cement bags, now avoided her driveway altogether. Linda, the treasurer, whispered apologies to neighbors about miscommunication and started keeping receipts close to her chest. Even Bill from Lot 14, who had defended her through a dozen shouting matches, motored to me at the mailbox, "I think she's finally overplayed her hand." And then came the petitions. It started small, a typed sheet taped to the community bulletin board outside the clubhouse. We, the undersigned homeowners of Willow Creek, request a special meeting to reconsider the current HOA leadership. In HOA law, that's the crack in the dam. According to our bylaws, Section 7.3, I had memorized it. If 20% of members sign a petition, the board must call a special meeting within 30 days. No wiggle room, no procedural trick to escape it. The law was clear. Neighbors signed in whispers, late at night, under porch lights and over folding tables at block parties. People who had once bowed under Karen's rules now found courage in each other. Each signature was a small rebellion, a flick of the pen that chipped away at her fortress. And I just watched, quietly, while the current I had stirred carried them forward. Of course, Karen noticed. She always noticed. The day she found the petition on the bulletin board, she ripped it down with the fury of a storm. At the next meeting, she slammed her gavel hard enough to splinter the wood. "Unauthorized documents will not be tolerated," she barked. Her voice echoed in the community center, sharp and brittle. But the room wasn't with her anymore. You could feel it in the silence that followed. The folding chairs weren't leaning forward in deference. They were leaning back, arms crossed, waiting her out. Someone whispered, "Too late." Someone else coughed deliberately loud. And when she threatened fines for subversive conduct, the laughter that broke out wasn't nervous. It was derisive. Still, she fought. Karen always fought. A letter arrived the following morning, slipped under my door. "Notice of infraction," it read in bold at the top. She accused me of community disruption, citing bylaws about conduct injurious to the reputation of the subdivision. She fined me $150. A weak shot, paper thin, but a shot nonetheless. I took the letter straight to Tom. He read it, snorted, and said, "That bylaw was repealed in 2016. She knows it. She's bluffing." Which made it even better, because bluffing meant weakness, and weakness meant the tide was still turning. By the end of the week, the petition had enough signatures, 41 households out of 200, just over the 20% threshold. It wasn't a revolution, but it was the spark. Karen had no choice but to announce a special meeting. The notice went out by mail, stiff and begrudging, with her signature scrawled angrily at the bottom. The date was set, 2 weeks from Thursday. You'd think those 2 weeks would pass quietly. You'd be wrong. Karen doubled down. She staged a community cleanup day, parading through the subdivision in a neon vest, barking orders at teenagers to collect litter from ditches. She sent glossy newsletters claiming outside agitators were poisoning our unity. She even hosted a barbecue, chicken charred, laughter forced, standing beside a fountain that no longer ran. But gossip doesn't die in barbecues, it thrives. And nothing fuels it faster than visible cracks in the Queen's armor. Every time someone mentioned her empty pool, every time a neighbor compared their brown lawn to the photo spreads in her newsletters, the story grew louder. By the night of the block party, even her most loyal allies whispered behind her back. I watched it all like a spectator at a trial, evidence stacking, testimony mounting, the jury of neighbors already deliberating in hushed voices. And Karen? She paced like a defendant who still believed she could charm her way out of a conviction. The special meeting loomed like a storm cloud. Flyers circulated with phrases like accountability, transparency, new leadership. Nobody said coup, but everyone thought it. And though my name was never printed on the flyers, I could feel eyes glancing toward me, subtle nods of recognition. I hadn't started the petition. I hadn't needed to. But the neighbors knew I had lit the first match when I exposed her violations. The night before the meeting, I couldn't sleep. The air was heavy, the subdivision uneasily quiet. Through the blinds I saw lights still burning in Karen's house, shadows pacing, the shape of her binder laid open on the dining table. She was preparing, drafting motions, rehearsing her gavel strikes like a general sharpening her sword. But power built on fear is fragile, and by then, fear had shifted sides. The next day, the clubhouse filled to bursting. Folding chairs scraped across linoleum, neighbors crammed shoulder to shoulder, the hum of whispers vibrating like a hive. Karen took her seat at the head of the table, pearls gleaming defiantly, binders stacked high. She raised the gavel, and in that charged silence, I realized something. The battle was no longer between her and me. It was between her and everyone else. But would the neighbors hold the line when she fought back, or would her final act be the most dangerous one yet?
"It's done," the clerk said, her voice flat, bureaucratic, merciless. I hung up the phone and sat there in silence, the air humming with a kind of electricity you only feel at the moment of impact. One call, that's all it had taken. One call backed by the right statute, the right timing, the right evidence. And with that, the entire neighborhood's water infrastructure, the veins and arteries of Karen's empire, froze solid. It was surgical, precise. I didn't have to lift a shovel. I didn't have to sneak into her yard at midnight. All it took was a single request under city ordinance, filed at the Utilities Department, citing the HOA's failure to comply with cross-connection control requirements. A technicality, sure, but in municipal law, technicalities are everything. You miss one annual inspection, one certification, one line item, and suddenly the spigot isn't just dripping, it's locked. And that was the end of it. Or at least the beginning of the end. Now let me back up because you might be wondering, how does one person manage to strangle an entire HOA with a phone call? The answer isn't as dramatic as you'd think. It's drier, paper-heavy, the kind of thing you wouldn't notice unless you were paying attention, which, of course, I was. 3 weeks earlier, while Karen was still strutting around the subdivision with her binder of rules, I was combing through municipal records. It started with a hunch. I'd seen the maintenance logs in the board's meeting minutes, the ones where Karen insisted the irrigation pump station did not require further inspection. She brushed off concerns, waved away expenses, but I knew enough about city codes to recognize the omission. Every subdivision with a shared irrigation system is required to test and certify its backflow prevention device annually. No exceptions. Failure to do so isn't just sloppy, it's a public health violation. So I checked,
And sure enough, the HOA hadn't filed a compliance certificate in over 2 years. That wasn't a mistake. That was negligence. The law is clear. Without proof of compliance, the city has the authority, in fact the obligation, to suspend service until the inspection is complete. All I had to do was point them toward the missing paperwork, which is exactly what I did on a Tuesday morning while sipping coffee at my kitchen table. The woman at the utilities department sounded tired when she answered. "Cross-connection control?" she said, like she'd already taken 50 calls that day. "Yes," I said. "I'm calling about Willow Creek HOA. Their irrigation system is currently operating without an active backflow certificate." She paused. Papers shuffled. "And who are you?" I said. "A concerned homeowner. You'll find their last certificate expired May of 2021. I can give you the parcel number if you'd like." Another pause, more typing, then a low whistle. "You're right, that's not good." And just like that, the gears of bureaucracy began to turn. She didn't need to know about Karen, about the years of fines and petty tyranny. She didn't need to know about the roses at the subdivision entrance or the way Karen used that fountain like a throne. All she needed was a missing form, a single, unchecked box. 2 days later, a notice went out. Immediate suspension of non-essential irrigation service pending compliance. Stamped with the city seal, mailed to every household. And just like that, the sprinklers went quiet. At first, nobody believed it. Karen spun the story as sabotage, claimed vandals had tampered with the system. She even called an emergency meeting, waving her binder and promising swift justice. "We will not be intimidated," she declared. But the notice was there in black and white. Neighbors held the letter in their hands. They saw the city seal. They saw the missing certificate date. And slowly the tide turned from confusion to realization, from realization to outrage. "Wait," I heard a woman whisper, "so we've been paying dues for maintenance she never did?" Another said, "If she ignored this, what else has she ignored?" The cracks widened and the water dried. Day by day, the subdivision decayed in the heat. Lawns browned at the edges. Once manicured flower beds wilted. The fountain at the entrance cracked under the sun, a hollow monument to neglect. But nothing hit harder than Karen's pool. Because here's the thing. Karen had tied her personal pool into the HOA's irrigation line. It wasn't legal, but she thought no one would ever know. When the water shut off, the pool went stagnant. By the second week, algae bloomed across the surface like a disease. Mosquitoes bred in the shallow end. And the smell, God, the smell, carried down the street like a warning flare. Neighbors who once feared her began laughing openly. "Queen Karen and her swamp," someone joked at the mailbox. Another quipped, "Should we call the county about mosquitoes?" Every laugh chipped away at her throne. Of course, Karen didn't take it quietly. She stormed door to door, binder in hand, demanding signatures for a complaint against the city. She accused me directly one evening, catching me on my driveway. "You did this," she hissed, eyes blazing, sweat beading on her forehead. I took a slow sip from my glass of ice water, letting the condensation run down my fingers. "Karen," I said, "all it took was one call." Her face twisted. She wanted to scream, but there were neighbors watching. She turned on her heel and marched back across the street, binder clutched to her chest like a shield. That confrontation was the breaking point. The board began fracturing almost immediately. Tom resigned quietly, muttering something about family obligations. Linda, the treasurer, stopped returning her calls. Even Bill, her most loyal enforcer, skipped the next meeting entirely. And still, the water stayed off. By the third week, desperation bled into paranoia. Karen started mailing out flyers, accusing rogue elements of colluding with the city. She claimed the petition to recall her was forged and threatened lawsuits against anyone who spoke against her. But her threats landed like wet paper now. The fear was gone. The neighbors had seen the swamp in her backyard, smelled the rot in the air, and they weren't going back. You could feel it in the way they gathered at dusk, huddled in driveways, whispering not about me anymore, but about her. Plans for a new board, ideas for fairer dues. Someone even joked about turning the empty fountain into a community garden. For the first time in years, Willow Creek felt less like a dictatorship and more like a neighborhood. And me? I didn't have to say a word. I just watched, glass in hand, while Karen's empire cracked and crumbled in the sun. But if you think she surrendered, you don't know Karen. One evening, as the cicadas screamed and the air hung heavy with the smell of her swampy pool, I caught sight of her standing at her mailbox, phone pressed to her ear, binder tucked under her arm. She was calling someone, a lawyer maybe, or a councilman. Her voice was low, sharp, cutting through the quiet. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. Because Karen wasn't the kind of person who accepted defeat. She was the kind who doubled down, who found loopholes, who twisted the knife even as she bled. So the question wasn't whether she'd fight back. The question was, how?